It's Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. We are live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio. Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show live from our Kingdom Financial Group studios here at 5th and State, having the crucial conversations that Erie needs. And we want to welcome in here to our radio station and for a substantive conversation, Dusti Dennis, the new Executive Director of the Erie Housing Authority. Dusti, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Joel.
Alrighty, so hey, we're a family show. We like to hear origin stories. Okay. Tell us how you came up and how you got involved in the housing world, if you will.
Okay. Well, I actually grew up in Erie, grew up in Wesleyville, graduated from Iroquois, and, well, we won't talk about that.
There's a lot of, can I just say this?
Sure.
There's a lot of amazing leaders in this community that are Iroquois Braves.
Oh, really?
I am amazed at how
are.
many people I run into, especially in the Gen X, deal,
Okay.
right?
Ask you off mic what year.
Okay, I'll tell you off mic what year.
Iroquois as well.
Yeah,
right.
Shaney's an Iroquois
nice.
grad,
Okay.
right? So yes.
I went to the University of Pittsburgh at Bradford and ended up making my home there for about 25 years. And I started off in social services, and it very quickly became evident to me that housing was so important in people's lives. And I ended up being lucky enough to get the position of the Deputy Director and then the Executive Director at the McKean County Housing and Redevelopment Authorities. Always admired the City of Erie Housing Authority for the programs and partnerships that they had here. And because Erie was my hometown, when the Deputy Executive Director position opened here, I applied for it, was again lucky enough to receive it, and became the Executive Director last year.
Wow. And again, there's a great history with the Housing Authority, City of Erie. When you think about John Horan and just all the things. What's the history of the Housing Authority? How far back do we go? Is this part of the Great Society, or is it before all that?
1938 is
so
when,
way before the 60s.
Yeah. So we were incorporated in 1938. So many of our properties were built in the 40s, so pretty old. And, starting to show some signs of needing some new life to be breathed into them. But they're still in really good shape. They've been well maintained over the years, but what you would expect with a property that's aging. Was
it a reaction to the troops coming home post-war? And when you think about the ones that are built in the 40s, I'm thinking.
Some of our housing, like over by what is now Wabtec, was built for the workers. Is my understanding. But housing historically was originally constructed to eliminate blight and to address, the working poor. So that's the Housing Authority's history across the country, really.
And is the direct connection to the federal government is through housing and urban development, right?
That is correct. All of our funding comes from the federal government and tenant rents. Okay,
there you go. So if I asked you what the mission of the Housing Authority of the City of Erie, what is it?
It's really to provide affordable housing, safe housing in our communities to meet the needs of the most vulnerable, and to just give them a hand up. Everything starts with a place to live. How do we get to work? How do we get to school if we don't have a place to call home? It makes it more challenging.
And, it goes without saying, it's very rare that you have openings, right? Or should I not say it that way?
Not really. So we have vacancies. We operate right now at about just under 97% occupancy.
So there's 3% of your properties that are
correct.
available.
And it does take us a while sometimes to get those units turned around and ready to be rented. We put a lot of work. We have a fantastic maintenance staff that makes sure that any of these units that are ready to be rented, that we would be willing to rent to a family member. So they are completely redone and ready to go when the new resident moves in. So we do have a waiting list. It's about 18 months long, I would say, to get into public housing, depending on the bedroom size that you've applied for.
That's actually a lot shorter than I thought it would be.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it seems like it would be just a really tough thing,
Right.
And what do people do before they kind of get that nod? What are some of the stories you hear?
We have some that are homeless coming from the local shelters.
Wow.
We have some that are living with family, couch surfing. Some are just living in places that aren't the greatest, or maybe are not affordable to them, but they're just getting by until their name comes up on the list.
Right. We were talking off air of how much just about any kind of apartment could cost
Right.
here. Gone are the days, and again, they weren't that long ago, but 20, 25 years ago, you could find a flat in Erie, PA for $350, $400 a month.
Right.
2 bedrooms and a bath, maybe 3 bedrooms in a
Right.
flat in the inner city, right? And
Right.
that just doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. And if you look at the average for Erie, the average 2-bedroom is about $921 a month. And to be able to afford that, you have to make just over $20 an hour full-time wages. So think about that, and think about our service industry workers, and do they make that?
Mm-hmm.
That's not affordable to the average person.
Right. Or you're got 2 roommates or what have you,
Right.
right? To
Right.
be able to, or your spouse or significant other is also making that 20
Right,
bucks an
but
hour.
in many cases, it's our single-parent households that have children in the house that are trying to afford these rents. And not that the rents are out of line. That's not what I'm saying. It's just
Right.
you have a population that needs help, and they're valued by our communities.
Again, just so that our listeners understand, because again, some of us have been around a while, we have misnomers or
Right.
misunderstandings of what the current climate is. People think, well, okay, I remember coming up and the landlord lived in the bottom or the top flat, or if it was a duplex, they lived in one side of the duplex and then they rented the other side of the duplex, or maybe they had a mother-in-law's apartment that they would rent out or something like that. Is that still a typical thing, or has the whole rental market kind of changed in your opinion? As far as there's a lot of out-of-town owners, there's a lot
Right.
of distant owners. Even we're hearing about private equity taking up multifamily units and things like that.
I would say you're probably correct that it has changed, that it's more private landlords, that we have some landlords that have multiple properties and we have some landlords that just have a few. So
Yeah.
it's probably a mixture. And then there are some developers that, will try to buy up certain types of properties, particularly those that are subsidized and whatnot.
Okay, do you guys get involved with the Section 8 part of it as a housing authority, that are owned privately?
So we have some relationships with some of the local developers like Han. So we might
Okay.
use Section 8 in their buildings. They're not assigned to any property specifically. So it would mean that a Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher applicant has a voucher and they're looking for an apartment, and Hands or Beacon Communities or whoever the developer might be would just so happen to have an apartment that would meet their needs. And so that unit is selected by the participant. We go out and do an inspection, and then we enter into what we call a HAP contract with the landlord.
What does that mean?
Housing Assistance Payment Contract. So they agree that that is the rent that they're going to accept for that apartment, and they're agreeing to that rent amount, and they won't charge any more than that for the resident.
So the housing authority, at least for the city of Erie, is kind of the representative of the federal HUD system here, whether it is your owned buildings,
Correct.
or owned by a private concern.
Correct.
Or another nonprofit, I should
Right.
say. So obviously there's kind of room for all of these folks, right? I mean,
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, if you had the magic wand, would you encourage more affordable housing development in Erie by private concerns, or is that something that you guys would like to take on yourself at the Housing Authority?
The Housing Authority is interested in development, and I think depending on what type of development we're talking, I think there's room at the table for other developers, certainly. But the Housing Authority is definitely interested in looking at the needs of the Erie community and seeing what we can do to help address them.
Yeah. I'm interested in where zoning impacts you guys, because there's a lot of R1 zoning in Erie,
Okay.
kind of almost based on, an old Erie model,
Okay.
whereas we need more decent housing and affordable housing, and we need some market rate, and we need some worker housing, right?
Right.
and you guys, you kind of work in all those fields. But if so much of the community is single family, doesn't that make it a challenge for folks like the Housing Authority?
We have not seen that challenge as of yet, but we have not really gotten into development yet either. So as we get into development, maybe I could address that down the road.
Sure.
But as of right now, we haven't seen any issues with zoning.
So when's the last time you guys had a project where you built something?
It's not been since I've been with the Housing Authority, and I've been with the Housing Authority since 2017. So we haven't done any
about
development.
8 years
Yeah,
or so.
it's been a while.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like something has turned post-COVID here. Have you noticed that too, with housing and the need and just the affordability of it all?
I think so, and I think rents have gone up a little bit, but I think they need to be increased so that owners can maintain their properties too, because you want your rents to be affordable, but you also want to be able to make improvements. And we're seeing it at the Housing Authority with regard to supply. So what you're saying, regarding increases, absolutely. Our rents are set by the federal government, but we still have increases to our budget because of the supplies that we have to purchase, the work that we have to pay for.
A 2x4 costs double what it used to.
Absolutely. Right.
I mean, it just is that simple as that, right?
And so our private landlords experience that as well.
Right. Stay with us. We're talking to Dusti Dennis. It's this really super important conversation about housing. We'll be back in just a little bit. It's Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. Dusti Dennis is our guest. We're talking about the Erie Housing Authority. 8 years she's been part of the staff and is now the executive director of the Erie Housing Authority. One of those, there's a lot of preconceived notions about the Housing Authority and about what people used to call the projects, right? The affordable housing that are owned. What's the crime rate?
Oh my gosh, it's almost nothing.
See, I mean, that's
really
one of those things that growing up in Erie, you would never know that.
I have no issue walking through any of our neighborhoods at 10 o'clock at night. We have security cameras, we have lighting, we have a partnership with the City of Erie Police Department for 6 City of Erie police officers that patrol our neighborhoods from noon until 4 in the morning. And really our biggest crime in public housing is domestic violence.
Sure.
It's really not, break-ins, or very rarely do we have anything violent in public housing.
And there is There's been rules. I mean, there's rules on who's allowed to stay overnight in public
Correct.
housing. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So residents are allowed to have a guest 14 nights out of a calendar year.
Out of the whole year?
Out of the whole year. And those 14 days, it doesn't mean you get 14 days with each guest. It means 14 days, period. And we do look for things like that. So anybody that's not supposed to be a part of the household, residents can get evicted if they have somebody staying with them that is not on the lease. Residents can be evicted if they have a guest who causes problems on housing authority property. So,
and that's really probably over the last several decades. That's really probably put the kibosh on a lot of the things. Again, the preconceived notions about it, right?
And our police officers know they have access to our database in terms of who lives in our properties. They don't.
So you have your own force.
Well, they're City of Erie police officers, but we give them, when I say access to our database, they have access to what residents are supposed to be in what units. So if they pull up to one of our addresses, they know who's supposed to be in that household. So if someone's there causing problems and their name isn't on the lease, they are asked to leave.
Wow. Well, again, the incentive to stay is so strong that you don't want to mess with that.
Correct.
That's remarkable. You were saying that you're involved and have partnerships with many of the social service agencies. Can you explain that?
Sure. I know I'm going to leave some out, and you probably don't have enough time for all of them.
Right.
But we have a lot of great partnerships with local providers. GCAC is in Schmid Towers and Friendship Apartments, and they provide what we call Home Plus services. So we have a case manager and we have a nurse on duty in both of those buildings. And so if somebody needs access to resources, medication monitoring, assistance with taking their medications on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, that is, there is someone available for them. They help with activities in our buildings, and they just help keep connected with our residents. So that has been a huge resource to those two buildings. The YMCA operates a kids club at the John Horan Garden Apartments that serves kids ages 6 to 18. They also have a kids club at Erie Heights off of West 38th Street. The Multicultural Resource Center has an office at the John Horan Garden Apartments, and they do job preparedness. At tax time, they do a free tax program that we have funded the last few years. And so anyone, whether they're a public housing resident or a Section 8 participant, can go to the John Horan Garden Apartments and get their taxes filed for free.
That's cool.
And what's nice is, they generate about $1 million in tax returns, and residents come in and get caught up on their rent. So it's a huge resource for them. The Quality of Life Learning Center is at Harbor Homes, and they do a fantastic job with job training as well and serving our new American families. They have a community garden behind their building, which we own, so they are in that building rent-free, but they provide a huge resource to our community. GED and ESL classes are taught there, and so right in the residents' neighborhood, they don't have to go anywhere, and they can access those services. DAFMART, Creative and Performing Arts, is at the John Horan Garden Apartments, and they do a fantastic job with our kids, again, ages 6 to 18. The kids can go and learn art. They have taught sewing classes. They have sewing machines. They have in the past done violin and cello classes, really for the kids to experience something that they might not otherwise get to experience. They put on, which I think might be coming up next week, a local theater production. They'll do once a year. Yep. And they do an art show. Jennifer Dennehy does an art show with the kids. You can go and purchase their art, and they're so proud, and they get a little stipend from whatever they sell.
And where is the show usually performed?
Up on State, PACA.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
It's once a year, and it's just, she does a fantastic job. We're very pleased with the services that she's been able to bring to our kids. We have a partnership with the Erie Public Library, and they do the bookmobile in some of our neighborhoods. And then this year we're going to do something a little bit different with them. They used to do a 1-week summer reading course, and that was out at the John Horan Garden Apartments. But this summer we've decided that we're going to bring them to our Meet Your Neighbor nights in some of our developments and our national night out at Erie Heights. Mm-hmm. And that way more families can experience and have access to the library and hopefully use the library as a resource going forward.
That's really remarkable. The I'm amazed at you know at kind of there's already kind of wraparound services happening here.
Right.
And one of the conversations that we are having is when it comes to battling chronic homelessness,
Right.
is the idea that not only do you need to have housing first, but you also need to wrap around, behavioral health services, drug and alcohol, mitigation, right? Substance abuse, counseling and things like that. Would you say that the housing authority is already dipped its toe, or maybe has dived right in on these service wraparounds for?
I would say, and this has been built over the last probably 25 years. So my predecessor, Mike Fraley, and prior to him, John Horan, this was really a priority for them to make sure that we were setting our residents up for success and building communities. And that's exactly what we've done. We've given residents the resources that they need, hopefully, to use public housing as a stepping stone and go on and purchase a home. And we do have a lot of residents who will at some point go out and purchase a home.
But have folks that have been in that kind of that fully homeless, unhoused population, have they attempted to, find a place with you guys at one of your facilities, and have they been able to take advantage of these? I'm trying to figure out: are we reinventing a wheel right now?
So not everybody's going to succeed in public housing, right? So you've got populations that aren't good neighbors yet. And so we also have a partnership with Community Shelter Services, who does a fantastic job at the Lodge on Sass and Columbus Apartments. So we fund 2 case managers there, and then we also provide them with the Section 8 contract, which is project-based to those 2 properties. So they get the rental assistance for the residents. The residents pay 30% of their income towards their rent. The housing authority pays the rest. So there's certainly is a population that might not make it at the housing authority yet, but programs like Community Shelter Services and that Housing First model are trying to work with that population to build their skills to becoming a better resident and a better neighbor, so that they can move into public housing or get a Section 8 voucher.
So we are seeing kind of this type of approach where let's get people into a home, let's get them some services, and let's give them the soft skills to be, like you say, to be a better neighbor.
Right. And not everybody will succeed, but
sure,
they have to be given the opportunity. And that's what these programs are really focused on, is giving people the opportunity. It's whether or not they take that opportunity and run with it.
And it just sounds like we are missing capacity in that strata of housing, of how do we house the chronically unhoused.
Right. And then there's always the challenge. Not everyone wants to be housed, too.
There's that, too.
So
hang on to that thought, because that's a big one. Because when we come back from the break, I want to get into all the different types of housing that you provide, including the situation where, you know what, do you want to actually have a roof over your head? I'm getting pushed into my thinking that everybody does, but we've got to teach them how. Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. You can maybe build some apartments here. I'm talking to Dusti Dennis. She's the executive director of the Erie Housing Authority, and we want to get into the different types of housing, and it makes me wonder, what would it take for you? You need to build like a strategic plan? Is there already one in place that is indicating?
You should ask. So
yes.
We're actually in the process of working on our 5-year strategic plan right now. We went out for proposals about 3 or 4 months ago and selected Barry Dunn, and they are the consultant that's been working with us for the last 2 months on sculpting our strategic plan, and we hope to have it in place by the end of May, beginning of June.
Are you doing any public input at all?
So we did get some input from our stakeholders, so the community partners that we have, and we really tried to focus on our residents.
Sure.
So we had some resident focus groups. I think we had 3 of those, and we did surveys. We surveyed our staff and we surveyed our residents.
All right, so let's take it from, let's say, maybe the most expensive to the least. And so is the housing authority involved, and maybe it's not a part of your mandate, but are you involved in any market rate housing?
Not necessarily a market rate, but we have affordable housing, which would be our Erie Heights property, and those are 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom family units, and then Curry Shell, which is for 62 and older.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding terms here,
Right?
because again, in my very small amount of knowledge, I hear that there's market rate, there is working man's or some kind of that kind of rate, and then there's affordable housing, and then there's shelters, right? So do you get into that? It sounds like Erie Heights is kind of a working man's.
It's right. It's kind of a mixture of. It's not subsidized in any way. Like I said, it doesn't receive any federal subsidy from the federal government, but the rents are kept affordable for working families that are just trying to earn a good wage.
Sure.
Maybe would struggle in the open market.
Right. And again, I would imagine demand for that one is pretty high, right?
Oh, right. We have waiting lists. All of our properties have waiting lists.
Yeah. So you have a senior living workers type of housing, and you also have Erie Heights for families. What's the next step? Do you have then what is called, you have the subsidized housing, right?
Right. So we have low-income public housing, and then to make it really confusing, we also have some properties that are funded through the multifamily office at HUD.
What's the distinction there?
It's basically the same program. It's just from a different source. So multifamily comes from a Section 8 platform. It's really, I know it gets. I know. It's basically
isn't the low income public housing also Section 8 or no?
No, low income public housing is public housing that is maintained and owned by the housing authority, by the local authorities throughout the country. Section 8 is a housing subsidy that participants apply for and receive, and then they take that voucher, we call it, and they go out into the community and they find a private landlord to rent from. The housing authority inspects the property to make sure that it meets our standards, and then they enter into a contract with the landlord, the resident does, and then the housing authority also enters into a contract with the landlord.
So if I were to ask, what is a typical Section 8 type of house? Are we talking about that classic flat that somebody might want to reserve,
It could
but it's a
be.
one-off, or is it usually somebody's built 4 townhouses and they're all Section 8?
So we have a little mixture of everything. So somebody might have found a townhouse that a local landlord has, and there might be a string of 4 units in that building, but maybe only one is occupied by a Section 8 household. We talked about Hands. We have some Section 8 vouchers at the Boston store, for example. We also have
Hands owns that, or
Hands owns the Boston store, right?
But it's mixed use because there is some market rate there.
I believe so. I don't want to.
Okay, right. We'll get Hands in here, but I'm trying to understand this, that you could have a project,
absolutely,
and it could help. It can be helped being built by doing some affordable housing along
Sure.
with the market rate.
Sure. But there's also single family homes that have a Section 8 household living in them.
Okay.
It just depends on what the person finds for rent in the community and if the landlord is willing to work with the Section 8 office.
Is it beneficial for a landlord? Let's say I own a home on my old neighborhood, 18th Street, right? And it came up in the family. I let it go Section 8. What are the benefits to me as a landlord, as opposed to just getting folks in there?
Really, you know that you're going to get the housing authority's portion of the rent on a monthly basis. Now, the resident pays their portion, but that certainly is a benefit. So if the rent is $500 a month and the housing authority is paying $300 and the tenant's paying $200, you know you're getting that $300 a month by the 5th of the month every month.
Mm-hmm. So how do those percentages work? They basically pay 30% of the rent?
They pay 30% of their income.
Of their income.
So whatever the household income is, 30% of that goes towards their rent.
So if you are totally not getting, if you're only getting, federal income, I don't know what program.
Like Social Security.
SSI
right.
kind of thing. So they take 30% of the SSI toward the
Correct.
housing?
That's correct.
What about if it's you and the kids? A lot of times the kids are on SSI. How does that work?
They pay 30%. Now they do get, if a household has 3 children, for example, when we're determining what their portion of the rent is, they do get a deduction for each dependent.
Okay.
And it's like $480 off their annual income per dependent.
Okay.
So it just reduces their annual income a little bit to adjust for having those dependents.
Does the system, in your opinion, does the system work, with the federal subsidies like that, the Section 8 system? Is it working?
It works. It provides...
That seems like a high percentage.
It is a high percentage. We have talked about internally, would it be better if there were different tiers, so anybody below this income limit pays this amount. Mm-hmm. It might help a little bit. We do also have a minimum rent. So there is a $50 minimum rent for public housing in Section 8 so that anybody whose income is very low, so maybe someone who's just receiving TANF, for example, and has a household of 5 children and a single parent, for example.
What did you say, TANF? What's that
TANF. So cash assistance.
Okay.
Sorry. They might only pay $50 because their income is so low and they have, 5 children. And so that might qualify them for a minimum, what we would call a minimum rent.
Right. Wow. $50. Amazing. I'm trying to understand this ecosystem that you operate in because it seems to be quite complicated.
Yeah, when you figure it out, would you let us all know at the Housing Authority, please?
So there's a low-income public housing, and then there's multifamily Section 8. And those are not buildings necessarily that you own, the Section 8 ones.
That is correct.
Okay, so the low-income public housing, tell us about some of those facilities that you have. Are those the towers, the garden apartments, and things like that?
Sure. So we have 1,850 public housing units throughout the city of Erie. 2 of those buildings are right downtown, centrally located, Schmid Towers and Friendship Apartments. And then we have Ostro Apartments up on Davison and 4 family developments. So the John Horan Garden Apartments, Harbor Homes, which is off of Buffalo Road, Lake City, which is not in Lake City. That becomes very confusing for people.
That's an unfortunate naming.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are some units over between 16th and 17th over by Holland and German in that area. And then we also have the Pineview apartments. So we have Pineview up on Shaper and Agnes Prescaro, which is over on Washington and Bauer, 24th and 25th.
Sure.
So we have a lot of, I don't know that people realize this, we have a lot of single-family homes scattered throughout the city of Erie. And so residents pay 30% towards their rent, but also pay the utilities for those homes.
And they're owned by the housing authority.
They're owned by the housing authority.
Just
Correct.
a single family home.
Correct. And then we have what HUD calls an ACC, an annual contributions contract, that prohibits us from being able to sell those properties or take a mortgage out on those properties.
So you have to own them all outright.
We own them, correct.
Right. Does that make it difficult for you to do further development? Or what would it take? Okay, you get your strategic plan,
Right.
come back, and they're saying, man, we need 200 more affordable housing units, which I'm a feeling that number is going to be much higher than that. But let's say you're going to start with 200 units, right? Like, how would you go about that, and how do you fight the kind of the not in my backyard approach to this? Because again, we started the conversation with
Right.
zoning is tough in this town for you to build like another major development.
So if the housing authority goes down the development road, we would first have to find funding. So, we would probably look to tax credits through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. There's also some funding through the Federal Home Loan Bank, through the Affordable Housing Program. So there's some funding sources that we've identified, but they're very competitive.
Sure.
So they're not easy to come by. We would first obviously have to identify our population and find a location and come up with a schematic design and then look for that funding based on the cost estimate.
Yeah, it's not something that you can float a bond.
We could look into the bonds. We've not done that. I've not done that in my tenure, but that's certainly something we could look towards, yes.
I mean,
Absolutely.
somehow we had to build Erie Heights. I mean,
Right.
that had to be a big deal, right?
That's way before me, but yes, I'm sure it was.
I'm just interested in how this would all shake out in the modern era, because we have a city that was built for 140,000 people.
Right.
We're about 95,000. Yet people are struggling to find something they can afford. Either it's totally trashed or it's just so it doesn't match up with income.
Right.
And again, I'm sure you hear these stories every day, right?
We do. And there's the city of Erie isn't unlike any other
Right.
area throughout the country. And it's taken us a long time to get to this point. Blight didn't just occur overnight, and I do think the city is trying to address it, but it's not going to address it overnight.
What is your relationship with the city land bank and the county land bank?
So we don't interact with them at this point a lot. I see that maybe changing down the road. If they have a property that is next to one of our scattered sites, for example, they will send us a letter alerting us to that effect. And then typically we will submit a bid because that gives our resident green space.
So if there's an adjacent lot that needs the house to come down, you can get some green space out of it.
We could get some green space out of it, absolutely.
I know this question is going to come up from listeners, so I'm just going to ask you point blank. How does it work with immigration and what you do? Because the people that I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Right.
How are new Americans? What are their statuses for them to be eligible for public housing?
So they have to be an eligible citizen or there's also such a thing as an eligible non-citizen.
Okay.
And our staff verify that through, I believe it's called the SAVE system, through the federal government. So they do have to meet the qualifications that HUD sets forth in order to qualify for public housing or the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And we do verify that.
Okay, so basically you're not housing, quote, non-eligible, illegal immigrants or
That
any
is
of that
correct.
stuff.
We are not.
Just wanted that
Unless
to be
it
out
is
there.
unbeknownst to us, we are not correct.
But yeah, there's a whole vetting process that comes with this
Right.
whole thing.
It is.
And again, every person that is willing to live in the city helps our population loss, and
Right.
and then we can grow.
And I will say, our new American families, I mentioned the Quality of Life Learning Center. They have really embraced the immigrant and refugee population. And I'd said that they're offering ESL and GED classes and working with them to do everything that they need to do to become employed, to hopefully at some point become a homeowner. And a lot of our new American families are here to attain the American dream. They live in public housing. We have what's called a family self-sufficiency program, and those participants get a little bit, as they're income increases and their rent then increases, we put the difference between what their baseline income was and what their rent is increasing to into an escrow account.
Oh, cool.
And so at the end of their 5 years, or they can graduate sooner than 5 years, they are eligible to receive that escrow account if they have met all the requirements and all the goals that they set forth with their case manager. And so at that point, those participants are usually taking that money and buying a home.
Wow.
Now, that's become a challenge during COVID. We were
Sure.
just talking about the housing market and how
Right.
difficult it is to find an affordable house. But historically, they take that money and they buy a home. And a lot of our new American families take advantage of that program and do very well.
Do you get a sense that I want to make sure that is there a situation where there is a time limit of somebody being in public housing? Because I've heard these stories of people growing up in public housing, 15,
Right.
18 years or whatever.
I think that there are two groups. So there are the population that are very comfortable in public housing because we do provide a sense of security. If something goes wrong with your apartment, we're going to come and fix it for you.
I mean, your toilet breaks.
Your toilet
it's
breaks and we're
fixed.
coming out and we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
And so for the working poor whose income might fluctuate, they don't know from month to month maybe how many hours they're going to get. And so there is that sense of security living in public housing. But then there's also the population that uses it as a stepping stone and moves on. And I to put a time frame to it, I'm not sure I could do that because it's different.
But
for
I mean,
everybody.
you don't say, hey, you've run out of
Oh,
time.
no, your
people can
time
stay
doesn't
their
elapse.
whole life.
Absolutely.
They can live there their whole lives. I want to end where we started, and we kind of started with the idea of chronic homelessness and things. There's a lot of conversations going on, Dusti, when it comes to, how to attack this issue. Are we talking amongst each other? I mean, do you feel like the Housing Authority is being heard and is also contributing to that community conversation?
We have been pulled in, and I believe we have been at the table for that. So, yes, I think the Housing Authority has had a voice in the discussion. And I think that the Housing First group, which we've been a part of, is trying to coordinate. But there's a lot of services, and there's a lot of duplication of services, I've noticed, too, in this city. So
you mean from different agencies doing
different
the same
agencies
thing?
doing the same, not that that's a bad thing.
Right.
But sometimes that can be difficult to coordinate.
Right. I'm interested to see what your strategic plan comes up with.
We'd love to come back and talk about it.
because honestly, it's a head scratcher to me how we could be so overbuilt, and yet it's just so difficult to find something that's affordable. And again, I mean, and people will wait 18 months to find something that you guys might be able to offer. So thank you so much for taking the time. This is really informative. Again, Dusti Dennis, the new Executive Director of the Erie Housing Authority. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It is 7 minutes in front of 5 o'clock.